Imagine this. You're starting your Monday with, a pretty simple worry. Your mother, who is dependable to a fault, just hasn't shown up for work.
Which is not like her at all.
Not at all. So you drive over to her house, this nice, comfortable place in Florida, and you're thinking, okay, maybe it's the flu, maybe a forgotten alarm. Simple things.
Right, a rational explanation.
But then you get there, and the front door is locked, and the key she gave you, the one that has always, always worked, it suddenly doesn't turn the deadbolt.
And that's the moment, isn't it? That small mechanical failure.
It's the moment that simple worry just evaporates, and what you have is this cold dread, because a seemingly common problem, a missing person, is immediately starting to unravel into a really terrifying family mystery.
And it's a mystery that doesn't stretch back days or weeks.
No. 15 long, silent years.
That inability to get inside, the realization that this intimate space, her mother's home, has been deliberately secured against her, it instantly forces the daughter, Cindy, and really the whole family, to focus on a horrifying possibility.
And one that's rooted entirely in their past.
Entirely. Cindy's first move is to call her brother, Ricky. He lives just a block away, with their sister, Stacy. And when Ricky finally manages to get them inside Marilyn Cannonan's house, the signs of distress are palpable.
The house, which is usually meticulous, is in total disarray.
Right. And what they discover, and maybe more importantly what they immediately fear, it's not some new enemy. It's the ghost of an old one.
Okay, so let's unpack this. This is a monumental tragedy, and our mission for this deep dive is really to trace a history that is just defined by crippling fear.
And the oppressive burden of this one man, the patriarch, Richard Cannonan.
Exactly. We are going to examine how his absence defined this family for 15 years, and then how a new disappearance forces his 3 children to confront secrets that were buried, both literally and figuratively, in their shared history.
We have to unpack the financial motives, which are complex.
Oh, absolutely. And the shifting blame, the trauma, and just the utterly shocking discoveries police made about this family. It's a profound study in how deeply trauma is inherited.
And how the memory of a monster can, manipulate the actions of his victims long, long after he's physically gone.
So when Ricky and Cindy finally force their way into 65-year-old Marilyn's home, that untidy state is the first major warning sign.
Right, but Cindy notices things that are more specific than just a simple mess. She realizes that several prominent framed photographs are gone.
Which photos?
Specifically the ones featuring her and her sister, Stacy. They're just missing from the entryway and the living room walls.
Wow, that's very specific. It's a subtle clue, isn't it? It's just a deliberate removal.
It does. Maybe a hasty departure or maybe an attempt to erase the identities of the people who mattered most to Marilyn.
But the really magnetic, attention-seizing clue is waiting for them right there on the kitchen counter.
Yeah, this is the thing that changes everything. A scattering of official-looking papers.
Papers related to Social Security and disability checks, and these weren't just any papers.
No. These checks were issued in the name of Richard Cannon and Marilyn's husband, the children's father, the man who had been gone, just absolutely vanished, for 15 years.
And that number, 15 years, it's so critical here.
It's everything. He disappeared on September 15th, 1988, yet these checks, despite his disappearance, they had continued to arrive year after year.
And Marilyn had been cashing them.
The whole time. This was a sustained 15-year-long act of federal fraud.
So the presence of those specific papers on the counter, coupled with their mother's disappearance, it just instantly gave the siblings an answer that, while terrifying, it felt logical to them.
It did. Their immediate conclusion was, he is back, Richard has returned, the monster has caught her.
And that fear, the panic of the patriarch's return, it completely overrides any conventional concern for their mother's safety, at least initially.
Their minds don't jump to a robbery or some random act of violence.
No. Their immediate focus is just on this horrifying possibility that their father had finally come back and harmed Marilyn because she was stealing his social welfare payments.
And Ricky, in particular, was absolutely convinced. He was emphatic, telling his sisters that Richard had been tracking the fraud, had caught her, and had kidnapped her.
It's an extraordinary psychological reaction. It just shows the enduring and really pervasive power of that abusive figure.
The immediate conclusion is not that a new threat has appeared, but that the old threat has just resurfaced.
And it's so telling that when Cindy first called the police deputy, she didn't report her mother missing.
No. She reported that her father had returned and kidnapped her mother.
That detail is it's so crucial to understanding this family dynamic. You have 3 panicked grown adults, terrified by the idea of their father, and they're instantly transported back to their miserable, fearful childhoods.
And the police, they quickly realize they're dealing with something deeply, deeply abnormal here.
Cindy gives them the exact date her father vanished, September 15th, 1988. And this is where the coincidences start to become genuinely spine-chilling.
Right, because Marilyn disappeared exactly 15 years later.
To the dead.
To the day, September 15th. And with the discovery of those fraudulent checks, the police now realize they don't have one missing person.
They have 2, Marilyn and Richard Cannon. And that timeline tied to that recurring date, it just adds this layer of dread that they can't ignore.
So the initial priority for investigators, given the severity of the family's reaction, is just to locate Richard. They start digging into his history.
But the children are unequivocal. The legacy he left behind was one of violence.
Oh, absolutely. They describe Richard Cannon as an abusive alcoholic, a terrible husband, and a profoundly monstrous father. The children use one word that really stuck with the investigators.
Surreal.
Surreal, meaning it was completely divorced from any reality of a normal, safe family life.
And the arbitrary nature of his violence is what makes it so psychologically damaging, isn't it? He would beat all the children until they bled over these trivial infractions.
Trivial is the word, like lumpy potatoes at dinner. Or if the television remote control malfunctioned and he couldn't change the channel.
So the violence wasn't about correction. It was about absolute terror-inducing control.
And we have specific, just brutal anecdotes that reveal the extent of his cruelty. The kids told police that Richard once dragged young Ricky into the woods and chained him overnight to a tree.
Chained him to a tree.
For some minor infraction.
Yep.
A punishment that just speaks to utter dehumanization. And his cruelty wasn't just limited to the children.
No, in a moment that just reveals his hatred for anyone challenging his control, Richard once threatened to kill Cindy and her husband if she went through with her wedding.
So they had to keep the wedding time, date, and location a complete secret, just to ensure their own safety.
And he couldn't even manage to stay sober for his kids' high school graduations. Just absolute disregard for their achievements, their well-being, anything.
That constant, unpredictable violence led to this remarkable, if tragic, survival mechanism.
The nomadic existence.
Yeah. The family lived a life on the run, moving frequently, Minnesota to Arkansas, Maine to California. They moved every single time neighbors or the community got wind that something was wrong.
When they noticed the bruises.
Or heard the screams. The purpose of that constant relocation was just systematic avoidance of authority. They were preventing anyone from ever having the time to intervene.
So the children learned very quickly not to form close friendships. It was a liability. They knew they'd be moving again soon.
It completely fractured their ability to establish stable identities or trust systems outside the family. So when Richard finally walked out in September of 1988, they didn't file a missing person report.
They didn't even consider it.
Not for a second. The consensus universally was relief. Investigators noted that of all the people they spoke to, nobody had a single positive thing to say about Richard Cannon.
So that's the context. A family relieved, one member vanished, now terrified he has returned to claim another.
But with Richard Cannon unreachable, and the evidence confirming he had been missing for 15 years and, generating fraudulent checks that whole time, the investigation has to pivot.
Right. If the monster patriarch hasn't returned, then who perpetrated this current disappearance?
And the focus naturally shifts to the people closest to Marilyn, her 3 adult children.
And this is where a critical, really destabilizing factor enters the narrative. Money.
A lot of money. Marilyn had recently inherited a fairly large family fortune from her own father.
And this sudden influx of wealth, while maybe it was intended to offer security, it actually introduced a massive new point of tension into this already fractured family dynamic.
It really did. The source material reveals that Marilyn started expressing fear to her neighbors, to coworkers, specifically worrying that her daughter Stacy and her son Ricky might try to take the money from her.
She actually said that. She was afraid of her own kids.
She confided in one neighbor that she was afraid of what her children were capable of doing because of the inheritance.
Wow. And it wasn't just this, abstract worry about the money itself.
No, she was actively concerned because Stacy and her partner, Susan Cohen, were looking for a house in her immediate neighborhood.
That's close.
Too close for Marilyn. She told coworkers she felt they were getting too intrusive. She wanted her privacy, but underneath that, You can hear this deep-seated suspicion about their intentions.
So the police follow this line of inquiry, and they focus initially on Ricky.
Right, based on information provided by Cindy. Cindy tells investigators that Ricky harbored a serious, long-standing grudge against Marilyn.
Grudge for what?
He believed she had failed him. Failed to protect him and the others from Richard's brutal, systematic violence during their childhood.
And Ricky had witnessed violence that, it transcends typical domestic abuse. This was survival horror.
It was. We know that Richard, in a fight in Arkansas, once took a knife and carved a horseshoe shape into Marilyn's forehead.
The scar was permanent?
Permanent. He also tried to drown her in their backyard pool, holding her underwater until she almost passed out. Marilyn was routinely covered in bruises.
And Ricky, as the oldest, he carried the immense weight of being forced to witness these savageries without any power to stop them.
That helplessness is a corrosive emotional inheritance. It really is. And that trauma, it drove Ricky away.
After Richard vanished, he just left.
Left home and became a transient, a drifter, disappearing for years at a time. He'd pop up for 6 months, then vanish for 2 or 3 years. He was disconnected, a loner.
But Stacy had a different view of him.
Yes, she did. She always held on to this softer image of her older brother. She saw him as the family protector, the one who often intervened in fights, sometimes getting hurt himself in the process.
So when their grandfather died and Ricky missed the funeral?
Stacy and Susan made a deliberate effort to track him down. They eventually found him living in a dilapidated trailer park, just a ruin. Completely isolated.
And Stacy, who was just yearning for that elusive normalcy they never had as kids, she invited him to move in with her and Susan.
Right, into their large 4-bedroom house, which was, conveniently located just a block away from Marilyn's home.
And this proximity, this reunion, it led to a brief but really transformative period for the siblings.
It did. Ricky, now resettled, he cooked these large family dinners. Easter, Memorial Day, the 4th of July. The sources describe this time as the happiest the siblings had ever known.
Finally enjoying true shared family company without the physical or metaphorical shadow of their father hanging over them.
Exactly. Stacy felt she finally had the big brother and protector she had always missed.
But beneath that fragile, newly built life lay the deeper, darker trauma suffered by Stacy, and this is essential to understanding her behavior later on.
It is. Her abuse was unique and particularly insidious. It started when she was only 4 years old.
And it wasn't just physical, it was systematically controlled and chemically assisted.
Richard would give Stacy alcohol, starting when she was in kindergarten or first grade, specifically to make her compliant and less resistant to his sexual assaults.
Yeah.
With the most chilling detail, the ultimate act of coercive control was the physical threat.
The first time he sexually assaulted her, he held a loaded gun to her throat.
Let's just pause on that detail, because it is the fundamental insight into Stacy's entire adult response system. That loaded gun wasn't just a threat.
No, it was a permanent, visceral warning drilled into her psyche to keep absolutely quiet, remain still, and it ensured her perpetual silence and immediate, non-questioning obedience to an authority figure who demanded compliance under the threat of sudden death.
Exactly.
Right.
This is textbook-trained compliance. It's a form of learned helplessness developed in childhood. Stacy wasn't just damaged by abuse. She was literally trained to go into autopilot when faced with an existential threat or a dominant figure demanding action.
And this childhood training has massive implications for her adult behavior.
Huge. Specifically, her trust in Ricky, who'd sort of replaced that male authority figure, and her disastrous compliance later on.
Meanwhile, suspicion is really mounting against Ricky. Investigators learned that on the day Marilyn vanished, he was seen repeatedly moving large bags, bundles, and boxes from her house to his vehicle.
And when Stacy's confronted with these sightings, she doesn't immediately become suspicious of Ricky.
No, she provides this elaborate, seemingly rational explanation.
That Ricky was protecting Marilyn's valuable belongings from the IRS. He had convinced her that the IRS was pursuing Marilyn for the 15 years of Social Security fraud.
So if the government seized the house, they wouldn't get any of the valuables.
Exactly. And Stacy, leaning on her deep, trained trust for her brother, even helped him rent a storage unit to keep these valuable items safe.
But Ricky's story is a house of cards. It's constantly shifting under pressure.
First, he claims his father kidnapped Marilyn. Then he switches to the IRS threat. And finally, he suggests Marilyn received a large inheritance check and simply fled.
But Cindy, bless her heart, she acts as the only clear-eyed member of the family.
Relentlessly pursuing the truth.
She acts as a one-man detective, pressuring police, checking every aspect of Ricky and Stacy's accounts, noting they just didn't add up. She was calling the sheriff's office multiple times a day.
And Cindy's persistence pays off. It provides the investigative momentum they needed. Police confirm unequivocally there was no active Social Security fraud investigation targeting Marilyn.
Even if there had been, it would have been a long, drawn-out civil matter, not a scenario that would warrant her immediate frantic flight or sudden disappearance.
Precisely. And this confirmation exposed Ricky's constantly shifting narrative as a deliberate and desperate lie, solidifying the investigator's suspicion that he knows far, far more than he's admitting.
So the investigation shifts into high gear when a massive red flag, a deeply calculated maneuver, is discovered in the public records.
The day after Marilyn disappeared, Ricky went to the Department of Motor Vehicles.
The very next day.
The very next day. He legally changed his name from Ricky Cannonen Jr. to Richard Cannonen. He just dropped the Jr. And he also, crucially, changed his mailing address to Marilyn's house.
Okay, let's pause on that maneuver because that is the pivot point from a simple missing person case to a calculated financial crime.
Absolutely. He wasn't just changing his identity, he was attempting a hostile takeover of the family assets using bureaucratic sleight of hand.
You have to remember, the deed for the Florida home was never changed after Richard Sr. vanished in '88.
Right, it remained in the original abusive father's name, Richard Cannonen.
So, by legally changing his own name to match his father's exactly, Ricky wasn't just acquiring an identity.
He was weaponizing the ghost of his father.
Precisely. By becoming Richard Cannonen, he could now potentially access property records, engage in transactions, maybe even secure loans, using his new legal identity to masquerade as the sole owner of the house.
This highly premeditated move, carried out within 24 hours of Marilyn's disappearance, provided the investigators with a crystal-clear financial motive for foul play.
It perfectly aligns with the financial opportunism they were already suspecting.
But even before the banking records fully materialized, there was highly visible evidence of asset depletion.
The yard sale.
The yard sale. A sharp-eyed detective just driving past Ricky and Stacy's house noticed something strange. A massive, sprawling yard sale, specifically featuring high-value collectibles.
And the detective, pretending to browse, overheard Stacy's partner, Susan Cohen, complaining about the work involved.
Yeah, saying something like, Marilyn wanted me to sell all this stuff. But this created an immediate, glaring contradiction.
Because why would Ricky claim he was protecting Marilyn's valuables from the IRS by putting them in a storage unit while simultaneously holding a massive yard sale of those very same possessions?
It exposes the weakness in Ricky's cover story and the depth of Stacy's manipulation. Then Cindy shows up at the yard sale, demanding to know why they were selling Mom's things.
And Stacy, falling back on Ricky's script, tried to calm her down, claiming the truly valuable collectibles were safely stored in the rented unit.
So the detectives then pivot to the digital trail. They start tracing Marilyn's money and review her bank records.
And they quickly confirm that substantial amounts of money were leaving her account and flowing into different business accounts after she was reported missing.
And what's fascinating here is how quickly they moved to weaponize online banking. Investigators discovered a new home banking account had been set up in Marilyn's name.
But they managed to trace the access point, the IP address used for setup, and the logins directly back to Ricky and Stacy's house.
So that provided concrete digital evidence that one or both of the siblings were actively draining Marilyn's funds while pretending she was either kidnapped or had fled.
So the police decided to use this information as a trap.
A very smart one. They froze the fraudulent account. The plan was simple. The culprit, desperate for the money, would have to contact the bank.
And that's exactly what happened. Later that afternoon, a woman calling herself Marilyn Cannonen called the bank's customer service center in Tennessee to ask why the account had been frozen.
Police immediately traced the incoming number, and Ricky answered the phone.
He was confronted by a detective masquerading as a bank representative. Ricky claimed his mother needed the money for bills, but when the detective pressed him to put Marilyn on the line for verification,
he refused, gave weak excuses, and that refusal sealed the deal for the investigators. The fraud was undeniably orchestrated from their location, and Marilyn was not the person on the phone.
So the pressure cooker is now fully closed around Ricky. 3 months have passed since Marilyn vanished, and the police have clear financial and digital links to the siblings.
Then, a crucial piece of physical evidence emerges. One of Marilyn's neighbors calls the detective to report an unusual sight.
Ricky is cementing the floor of Marilyn's garage.
That is the ultimate, universally understood red flag in any true crime investigation. Concrete is the classic, heavy-handed signal that something is being terminally concealed.
And this discovery prompts the police to put immediate heavy pressure on Ricky and Stacy. Detectives bring them both in for questioning, separating them immediately.
Right, to avoid them coordinating their stories.
Yeah.
And confronted with the undeniable bank fraud, the name change, the fresh concrete floor, Ricky gets visibly nervous.
He realizes the police know his financial scheme is a lie.
And in a moment of absolute desperation and calculation, Ricky pulls out an old, dusty 1989 rental receipt.
A receipt for what?
For a concrete saw. And he uses this receipt as a shield, attempting to throw his missing mother directly under the bus.
He claims Marilyn was responsible,
implying that she killed his father, Richard, 15 years prior. Ricky suggests, with this old receipt, that whatever is under the garage floor, buried deep in the earth, is the body of Richard Cannon, and that his mother was the murderer.
This is a huge pivot. He's now confessing to concealing a murder, but desperately trying to pin the actual killing on his missing mother, Marilyn.
Exactly. The police immediately obtain a search warrant for the garage floor.
So while Ricky is desperately trying to shift blame, Stacy is being interrogated separately.
And she maintains her claim that she knows nothing about the money, the storage unit, or the garage floor. She's confronted with the digital evidence, the name change, all of it.
But she insists she was just trusting her brother, completely unaware of the malicious details. Her ingrained obedience is just preventing her from questioning his actions.
But the police then introduce a fact that completely shatters Stacy's carefully constructed denial and her deep loyalty to her brother.
What do they tell her?
They tell Stacy that Ricky claimed to know the location of her mother's car. And for Stacy, that specific detailed knowledge of where the last trace of Marilyn could be found, it confirmed her worst fear.
Her mother wasn't just missing, she was dead.
She was dead. And Stacy realizes with stark clarity that the police suspect her involvement in the fraud and disappearance, leading to extreme emotional distress and the beginning of her break.
After hours of intense questioning where their stories failed to align, Ricky and Stacy are released.
However, police have placed them under electronic surveillance, recognizing the investigation had reached a critical, volatile boiling point.
And immediately upon arriving back at their house, Ricky breaks down and confesses to Stacy.
He drops the pretense completely, blurts out the chilling admission, "I have to tell you, I killed Mom."
Stacy describes falling into an absolute frenzy of fear and denial, but the confession is instantly followed by the most chilling use of coercive control.
Ricky then tries to coerce Stacy to a suicide pact. He threatens that if they don't die together, the police will arrest Stacy and her partner Susan, destroying both their lives and taking everything they worked for.
This is the moment where Stacy's childhood training takes over with devastating consequences.
It is. Facing an existential threat and a demand from an authority figure, her protector turned abuser, she falls back into that precise childhood pattern of immediate, programmed obedience.
She describes herself as going on autopilot, not thinking, not rationally assessing her options, just doing exactly what her brother told her to do.
She had been trained since age 4 to comply to avoid a worse fate. And in this heightened state of crisis, that survival mechanism, perversely, led her directly toward suicide.
The electronic surveillance suddenly goes dark, and the siblings are soon reported missing again.
Police track them down to a rented storage unit, the same unit they had allegedly rented to protect Marilyn's valuables from the IRS. They are found inside the unit, having attempted suicide by consuming a massive amount of cold medicine and alcohol and running the car engine inside the enclosed space. They are rushed to the hospital in critical condition.
And the police find separate farewell letters in the storage unit.
They do. Ricky's letter is explicit, unequivocally admitting to murdering his mother.
But Stacy's letter is different.
It's revealing in its vagueness. She states only that they were involved in Mom's death, but she couldn't bring herself to use the operative words, dying, killing, or murder.
Even in her final moments, her trauma-induced denial prevented her from verbally committing to the horrific reality of the violence.
So now, recovered enough to be in custody and charged with Marilyn's murder, Ricky reveals the stunning final truth. And it's more shocking than anyone could have anticipated.
He knows where 2 bodies are buried.
He confirms that Richard Cannon, the abusive patriarch who had been missing for 15 years, is indeed buried under the garage floor, right where the fresh concrete patch was.
The excavation confirmed the body was deliberately concealed deep, about 10 feet down.
Yeah, and they recovered skeletal remnants, including a skull and dentures, which were used to confirm the identity as Richard, who wore dentures.
The juxtaposition of the burials is horrifying. Richard, the source of 15 years of fear, was buried deep, permanently concealed.
But the second body, Marilyn Cannonen, the missing mother, was found much more recently concealed, buried in a shallow small rock garden immediately behind Stacy and Susan's house.
The discovery of both parents' remains, concealed by one or more of the children, confirms that the entire family history was just built on layers of deception, deep trauma, and murder.
With two bodies recovered, Ricky, now fully cooperating but still visibly calculated, begins constructing a new, self-serving narrative for Richard's death.
The one from 15 years earlier.
Right. He claims that in 1988, his mother Marilyn called him to the house, and Richard was already dead, wrapped in a large, heavy tarp on the garage floor.
Ricky claims, somewhat unbelievably, that he never asked what happened or confronted his mother. He says they decided to put Richard's body into a freezer in the garage, and later, together, they buried him.
But this story quickly fractures because Ricky, still desperate to deflect blame and reduce his own culpability, shifts the responsibility for Richard's death onto his sister Stacy.
He claims Stacy once told him she had shot Richard in the back of the head while he was sleeping.
And what is horrifying is that the forensic evidence corroborates a crucial detail of this story. The autopsy on Richard's skull confirms a small entry wound in the back of the head, and a bullet is recovered.
Which is consistent with being shot while resting or asleep.
Exactly. However, Stacy adamantly insists she knew absolutely nothing about her father's fate until Ricky's arrest. She was only told Richard had finally left them for good.
So Ricky then provides his account of Marilyn's murder, again implicating Stacy.
He does. He claims that on the night she vanished, they took Marilyn out to dinner and a movie, trying to make her feel comfortable and safe. After returning home, Ricky claims Stacy used a taser, which he says she had purchased just days before, to subdue their mother.
Ricky's description of the murder itself is chillingly detailed and brutal, placing himself as the primary agent of death.
But Stacy is the initiator. He claims he then sat directly on Marilyn's chest, tied her hands, and taped her mouth and nose shut. And then he stared into her eyes until she died of asphyxiation.
A cold, calculated confession to suffocating his mother, but he makes sure Stacy is placed at the scene, initiating the violence with the taser.
So, based on Ricky's shifting statements and the recovery of two bodies, Stacy is immediately charged with the murder of both her parents.
But the prosecution faced immediate and severe challenges.
They did. Due to the lack of witnesses, the 15-year passage of time, and Ricky's constantly conflicting testimonies, there was just insufficient concrete evidence regarding Richard's murder. That charge had to be dropped entirely.
So the trial for Marilyn's murder then became this devastating case of Stacy's word against Ricky's.
And Ricky's story about the movie night, coinciding with the murder, could not be verified by independent witnesses or cinema records. Stacy testified that they had dinner, dropped Marilyn off, and she maintained that was the extent of her knowledge.
So the jury was left to weigh the credibility of a man who confessed to murder and attempted suicide against a woman with documented severe childhood trauma who was seemingly manipulated into participating in the aftermath.
It was a complex legal calculus. The defense successfully argued that Stacy's subsequent actions, helping hide the body, participating in the suicide pact, were not the actions of a willing murderer, but of a victim of trauma who was trained since childhood to comply under duress.
And ultimately, the jury found insufficient concrete evidence linking Stacy to Marilyn's physical murder, especially given Ricky's overwhelming motivation to shift blame.
Stacy was acquitted on all charges.
And Ricky Cannonen, facing the full weight of his multiple admissions and the irrefutable physical evidence he provided.
The exact location of the bodies.
Right. He chose to plead guilty to the murder of Marilyn Cannonen in exchange for a lighter sentence. He received 30 years in prison.
Despite Stacy's acquittal and freedom, the murders permanently tore the remaining siblings apart. The emotional damage proved irreversible.
Stacy and Cindy, the two sisters, never spoke again after the trial concluded.
And yet Stacy expressed these conflicting, deeply complex emotions about Ricky, a perfect summation of the trauma bond.
She said that he will always be her brother, the childhood protector she desperately needed, and she will always love him.
But she will always fear him. That duality, that simultaneous feeling of love and terror, is the ultimate and most damaging legacy of the abuse, overriding the familial loyalty that brought them back together in the first place.
This devastating story illustrates in just profound detail how deeply ingrained patterns of abuse can supersede rational adult thought and action.
Ricky, the childhood protector who was severely beaten for intervening, he developed this desperate need to control and eliminate threats, especially when they centered around money and stability.
And Stacy, on the other hand, was trained to immediate, non-questioning obedience under the threat of lethal violence, a training regimen that lasted for years.
That concept of trained compliance is really the key psychological nugget here. Stacy's inability to fight back, or even to flee, when her brother confessed and demanded a suicide pact.
It was a direct, horrifying consequence of the trauma she suffered starting at age 4. The initial terror that drove them to involve the police, the fear of the abusive father returning, it ultimately masked a domestic horror that was already in progress.
Right, a horror driven by Ricky's own escalating desperation and financial greed. The initial crime, the murder of the father 15 years prior, was successfully concealed for a decade and a half.
Only revealed as a desperate measure by Ricky to deflect blame for the secondary, financially motivated crime, the murder of his mother.
It's a tragedy layered upon a tragedy, where one act of violence begets another, separated by 15 years of secrecy.
And so we leave you with this final, provocative thought to mull over. Consider the chilling fact that Richard Cannon, the patriarch who inflicted decades of terror, was already dead and buried 10 feet deep in concrete for 15 years.
Yet his memory, the crippling fear he instilled, and most importantly, his legal name, which Ricky stole and weaponized to control the property, were still powerful enough to drive all the subsequent events.
From the fraudulent checks to the property transfer and ultimately to the final tragedy of Marilyn's death.
It suggests that sometimes the true monster isn't the physical presence you fear, but the emotional legacy and coercive control it leaves behind, manipulating the lives and actions of its victims long after it has physically vanished from the world.
That's all we have time for today on The Deep Dive. Thank you for joining us for this analysis.
We'll see you next time.